Welcome back to another episode of Questions with Crocker, live at WVC with me, Dr. Crocker, my husband Shane.
Hey.
And we have a new guest today.
Hi, I'm Dr. Deer.
Yes, Dr. Deer is a fellow emergency veterinarian, and we are really excited because you guys sent in some awesome questions about being an emergency vet. I have enjoyed talking to you because we do similar things, but in kind of different settings. And so I think it's nice to share a little bit about our perspectives on emergency and hear about your journey. I actually started following you on social media because you do a lot of really informative videos. So I want to know why emergency medicine, and then also why did you decide to jump on social media and like share about what you do?
Yeah, so kind of funny. I think I've told you this before, but I was deciding between ER and racetrack when I was going into veterinary school.
Seems very similar.
They're very, very close. Yeah. And then there were a few things that really happened to narrow my focus more to the ER. One is when I didn't get into vet school the first time I applied. So I took a gap year. Okay. And during that gap year, I was like, I need more veterinary experience. So I applied at a clinic. The only clinic that called me back was an emergency clinic.
Okay.
And they were like, we train you from the ground up. My working interview, we had a transfer post-op splenectomy. And I was with the senior tech, and she's like, here's how you hold off to draw blood. And she's like, wait a minute. The dog is white. They throw it on the table. They open it up. It codes. The doctor thrusts her hand through the diaphragm, starts doing manual compressions.
They're on the heart. Just on the heart. Grabs that heart. And
is going. And my working interview had only ever worked in boarding, and then did like a little bit of like tech work that I use that term very loosely. And I'm sitting there, and there's the two girls who are also on their working interview, and they're
going immediately to racetrack vet.
Yeah, they're like, I've made a huge mistake.
They're looking like Shane right now, like what the?
And I'm like, and I'm sitting there because I'm like, the only thing I know how to do, I've never seen a code before, is I was like, I saw these people pulling up drugs, so I just grabbed it. And I'm sitting there with like a syringe of epi and a syringe of atropine. Like, what do you need next? Like, I was ready to roll.
You were in it.
Yeah. And
you're
then,
like, put me in, coach.
Yeah, I was so ready. And afterwards, they were like, oh, what's your experience? And I was like, boarding. Thank you for having me.
Mic drop.
So it was that. And then like working in that environment, I just realized that like that was my niche, because I almost didn't go to veterinary school, because working in the boarding clinic and working in that particular scenario, I was like, I don't know that this is necessarily for me. I'd been a horse girl my whole life. I played like horse racing games. I was like super into horse racing, still am. And so that was kind of where I was going. And then I worked at a local racetrack for one day.
You're like, no.
Absolutely not. I'm out.
And it is, it's very repetitive on the racetrack. Like, I don't think people know the things you do are the same things over and over.
I feel like we got some pushback about saying people should probably get some experience before going to vet school, but...
Prime example.
Yeah.
Prime example. She could have gone into racetrack and then been...
miserable.
Yeah. And maybe not enjoyed veterinary medicine as much. So I love that so much. And I feel like, so at our hospital, we actually have a ton of equine vets that have come over to small animal emergency. And I think it's because, especially if you did equine ambulatory, there is a component of like, I don't know what's going to happen. I have to like just figure shit out. That is definitely an ER mentality. I don't know.
I hope so, because I'm foul. I'm foul. I will drop.
We might be in trouble in this. Listen, you have two emergency vets. If you think that there might not be something inappropriate said, I don't know what to tell you right now.
Well, and it's like a colic is an emergency.
Yes.
You know, so they've experienced emergencies. And not only that, but emergencies on animals that are insured for $500,000.
Yes.
Like
the intensity is there. The
high stakes.
Yes, the high stakes. Sometimes not having everything you need and having to just rig things. I mean, I feel like I do that in the ER all the time. So
all the time.
It's a very, very similar personality. And it's funny. I like that you, instead of freaking out, you're like, what can I do to help in this situation? And again, I think that's our personality of like, let me run towards the commotion. Let me run towards,
run away
instead of
sneak out the back door. Like, you know, I've made a mistake.
Some people are like, I'm not engaging. Like Shay would be like, you guys look like you got that. So
wipe the sweat off the doctor's brow.
Yeah.
Like,
that is a great story. And that definitely epitomizes like what we experience. We were talking earlier about the fact that we live on, you know, cortisol and caffeine, and we like the energy and we like the excitement. And I think that is very true in that situation for sure. So now where do you work? Because I do think it's interesting when I talk to young vets, I don't know if you experience this, and they'll be like, I want to do emergency. That's great. Where? Do you want to be in a specialty hospital? Do you want to be in ER only? Do you want to work GP urgent care? Do you want to? There's a lot of forms of emergency. So what level are you at? What facility type are you at? As much as you want to share would be great.
Yeah. So I did an IR or an ER, ICU, critical care rotating internship right out of school. So I was at like a trauma level 1. I don't think they'd technically been trauma level 1 yet, but it was like 5 locations, very, very intense internship.
Big operation. Yeah.
And then they got bought out and I just didn't like the direction it was going. So I signed with what I still think is the only private ER. There may be one other private ER in the Phoenix area. It's ER, GP, and specialty.
Okay.
And so I've been there for it'll be 8 years this July.
That's a long time.
Yeah. And I'm transitioning to more of like a relief role just because of other things that are going on in my life. But I still consider them like my home hospital and like my touch base. This is where I grew the most as a veterinarian. You know, they say an internship equals 5 years, right? That's kind of like the whatever. And like, you know, a little bit of baptism by fire for a lot of it. But in this particular practice, like I could tell you what all the other doctors are going to do with their cases. Like we've all been there for years together. The turnover rate's pretty low. Like very, very, very cool to have. Like we've got internal medicine, we've got surgery. So having those people that you could just text and be like, hey, would you split this? Yeah. And how would you?
Yeah.
Amazing.
I love the collaboration, and you have to have that in the ER.
I'm intrigued by this model a little bit. So it's emergency, GP, and specialty all in one building.
So we have 3 locations.
Okay.
They all have GP and ER, and some of the original locations been there for like 20 something years, 25 years.
They're 24/7 or
yes, that one is and they've got a separate like in the same parking lot. One building is GP and one building is ER specialty. In my building, the GP and the ER are in the same space, and so it's so nice because I can be like, hey, Dr. H, I have a dog with an ear infection. We're out of Mometamax. What
else
do I
use?
What
are there other medications for an ear infection, or is that it?
They create lists for us, and then also like fleas and ticks are like not really a huge deal in the Phoenix area. So being like, hey, this like what these people live in Wisconsin most of the year, and now they're here, and like there's like a tick on them. Like, what do I do? Thank you.
Do y'all have like a dedicated surgery suite, or do y'all share surgery suites? How does that work?
Yeah, we have 2 surgery suites. One's technically the ER, and the other one's like technically the GP.
I mean, it has to be ready at all times, right? You can't have like a scheduled surgery going on.
Right. Yeah, but it's funny too because I've had dueling surgeries before where like I'm doing a C-section and the other vet's doing a GDV, and so we'll be like, can we just steal your suite for a hot minute and pop in there? So having the 2 is nice.
Do you have I'm also intrigued by the model. Do you have teams that are just ER and just GP, or does is overlap occur at all?
There is and there isn't. So if you're scheduled for like if you get hired on as ER, you are ER. Okay. If you get hired on as GP, like they may ask you like, hey, we have extra shifts. Do you want to like help out? Right. But and then like if there's a float tech that's like, hey, can you help me draw blood or something? But you are not expected as like a GP tech to
jump in on a code and do stuff. Okay.
They're not gonna be like, hey, can you run anesthesia on this coding? Like, you know, it's just not gonna happen. So that's nice.
I am also interested to see like how it flows, and I could see how you can help each other, especially for maybe like a non-emergent emergency, and being able to say like, we have this and this wait time. So then can you sometimes say like, maybe the GP side can take this case, or do you share cases in that way?
Sometimes during COVID, we definitely did because we were hit astronomically. I think we had like a 300% increase in our caseload over a very short period of time. And so the GP doctors, we also kind of instilled like a urgent care situation in that space because our GP was booked out 6 weeks. And so it would be like, hey, if you want to like work another day and just see like urgent care, you'd basically pick from the line and be like ear infection, skin, you know, whatever. And you could just, no appointments, just kind of pick things. That's kind of gone by the wayside because things have started to breathe a little bit more.
Even out a little bit more.
But there was that opportunity. And because we do have that GP component, we have clients, like truly we have clients that have been going there for years. And it's like, oh, well, if you're okay with this being like kind of a squeeze-in appointment, like come on in.
Yeah. I like that. You can be a little more accessible depending on what department is able to see. And if people are willing to like pay for whatever service it is.
True.
Because I would assume the fees are a little different depending on like which hospital. They're not?
Nope. The only difference between charges is the exam fee. Everything else is the same if you're on ER or GP.
That is shocking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really interesting because usually
Yeah, I would have never thought that.
a 24-hour facility, one, like the ER doctors get paid more usually, the technicians get paid more. And so your cost is more just to keep the doors open. So, okay.
Yeah. I think we make up for it in higher volume. And then it's all sick cases, essentially. Mostly sick cases. So
your average like ACT is going to be higher, like average transaction is going to be higher.
Yeah.
Okay. We need to look into that a little more because that is a very interesting model.
We can do a lot of looking.
It makes estimates easier because the 5 p.m. constipated cat is actually a blocked cat and you're supposed to be off at 5:30. It's a 15-minute whatever appointment. We don't do 15-minute appointments. So you know what I mean? Like, and then they can just be like, ER? Like, I cannot tell you how many times I've done that where they were like, can you? And I'm like, oh, yeah, for sure. And there's no difference cost-wise to the client for me unblocking the cat and hospitalizing it and GP unblocking the cat and transferring to ER to hospitalize.
They tried that model in human medicine for a while. A GP practice at 5 o'clock was shut down and become urgent care till midnight or whatever. But at that 5 o'clock, the charges immediately shifted. So they would have people sitting in a waiting room and then, it's past 5 o'clock. So now instead of $100, it's $400. Insane. So
there are some ERs in my area that have different exam fees depending on the time of day. And then I know some
and
of them,
holidays, like a lot of times they'll be like, we have a higher holiday exam fee.
Yeah. And then charge like overnight doctor fee for overnight hospitalization.
We don't do that. We do have an inpatient like exam. So if they're there, for 13 hours and they change to a new doctor and a new doctor does a whole new exam and kind of assessment, there is a charge. So it is, I guess, a little bit based on just how long they're there.
Yeah.
But it is, it's every time I talk to somebody, I like hear about a new way, I guess, to practice. And that's one of the best things I like about our job is you can create whatever works for you and works for your team. And obviously, if your team is very solid and they don't have a ton of people and turnover, then it's working and they're busy. And marketing wise, I could see how you can market the heck out of that. Now, I work with a lot of young vets and they always have a hard time with the fact that in the ER only, we see cases and then half the time we never know what happens with them. And I'm assuming you might sometimes have a little more follow-up if they're clients or they're there. I actually prefer not to know. I have this, I have this weird philosophy that I tell them that if I keep that pet alive through my shift, if I get it home and out the door, my assumption is they did great. Now, they might go to their GP and something else might be the case. But as an emergency vet, I am in a better place mentally if I just assume the best.
Yes.
Is that similar with you?
Yeah. Yeah. And, if there's a learning experience, I feel like I have a reputation in like the community that it's okay to reach out to me, like if I miss something or if something wasn't done a way that the GP vet would have preferred it, they know that if they email me, I don't mind. I'm not going to chew their head off. I'm not going to be like, you did this wrong. I'd never throw a colleague under the bus.
Oh, no, not at all.
Ever. And so I feel like knowing that that's my reputation, if there's a learning experience, by all means, but otherwise it did great.
Yeah. I saved it.
Yep, it's fine.
I mean, maybe not, but
it's thriving somewhere, but it's thriving.
That is definitely a coping mechanism I think we have. And on the, case of working with general practicing vets or when referring vets, 100% agree with you. Maintain that relationship. And I try to really be open about, call me, ask me prices, ask me expectations, ask me prognosis, because I want you to tell your client that so they don't show up. And you've told them A, B, and C. And then I say, well, actually, it's B, C, D. And then they're either pissed at you or pissed at me. Because we didn't communicate things as well as we should have. So GP vets, like I always tell them, call me. Just call and ask me and tell me what is going on and I will work you through it as much as I can, even if they're not going to come in.
Yeah. And I mean, I can tell you an estimate probably within a few $100, like without having to pull anything up. Yeah. Just I've been there for so long. I know what it costs.
Yeah. I think that it's gotten a little better, the us versus them, with GP and ER, but we can continue to kind of work on that a little bit more. Okay, so this podcast is based around questions, and I could just talk to you myself the whole time, but I probably need to ask you some questions. So one of the big things, and we got this several times, but at Katie Junie wanted to know, how overwhelming is it?
So you heard my working interview story.
Mm-hmm.
That is where I thrive. So when it's slow, the S word, or
Mm-hmm.
quiet,
Mm-hmm.
I don't do well.
Same.
I get really anxious, and I think I have ADD, and so I think those high stress situations is what really focuses me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can get overwhelmed. Like when there's a lot going on, like, you're the only doctor,
Mm-hmm.
you're doing CPR, and then they call another stat, and you're like, I have to still talk to this other stat. Statter is happening. We kind of joke about that. That can be very overwhelming, but I think after a while you realize that you kind of say the same thing over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like your parvo spiel, your CHF
Mm-hmm.
spiel, like your spiels are so ingrained in you that it almost becomes like, I don't want to call it flow chart because that's like not an appropriate way, but you're just like, this is priority. I'm doing this, then I'm doing this, then I'm doing this. And people with ADD are constantly making lists in their brain all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're in those high stress situations that are overwhelming, it's very natural for those of us with ADD to have already been like, I have anticipated the worst outcome for each of these cases. And this outcome is the worst of the worstest. So my brain has already prioritized that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I delegate.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot delegate, you will not do well as an ER vet.
That's true.
You need to focus on what your job is and utilizing your technicians to their full capability. And I think we don't. And I think it's why there's a lot of technician, like, I don't want to call it like displeasure, but they feel like they're not being utilized to their full potential.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I've always looked at it as having that veterinarian be more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
But that approach, I think, makes even more sense to me than just a straight efficiency.
Yeah, I never stay late to write my records. I've never stayed more than like 10, 15 minutes after a shift.
Mm-hmm.
My records are done. My stuff is in. Everything's ready to go. It's just the efficiency.
Yeah.
I've delegated.
And I will say, like, some people say, well, if you're fully staffed, yeah, that's ideal.
I'm not always fully staffed.
But I would say the same thing. And so it is something that you have to mature into a little bit as an emergency vet, because I do see
naturally.
No, I see younger vets get very overwhelmed. And also maybe, I don't know if you can speak to this, but maybe spend too much time over communicating sometimes. I think there is a sweet spot of giving the client the information they need to make decisions, to know like how critical something is, but not giving them every single little piece of detail and explaining what a high alk phos is. And so
they have to prove themselves.
Yes, they do.
It's like at some point you have to realize, like, what's the statistic? The average American reading level is like 5th to 6th grade. I don't say dextrose. I don't say glucose. I say their blood sugar is low. I'm going to give them sugar. Like, boom, boom. We don't need to go into all of it. Like it surprises me how many people have diabetes and don't understand like what insulin does, and they use it themselves. Right. And so I'm like, let's not get lost in the weeds here. Like, your pet's blood sugar is extremely high. I'm worried that he's in a crisis, a diabetic crisis. We don't need to talk about ketoacidosis and go through the whole mechanisms. Like, your dog's in a crisis. We need to figure out what pushed him into a crisis, because he was stable until he wasn't. So why did that change? And then we need to address the diabetes.
Yeah.
That's it.
And I'm not going to explain more in depth.
If they want to get into the weeds, for sure.
Like you said, I think sometimes, I'm not a veterinarian, obviously, but younger vets may feel like they need to prove themselves when really the coat that they have on and the name tag that says they're the doctor should be enough for them to just move on.
It depends on your clientele. So I have a large retirement clientele, like 55 plus. Arizona is snowbird city.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
So, and then like the area that I practice in, I would say about 30% of my clients during the winter are 55 plus retirees. And so they look at me and they're like, you're young. Yeah. Like, what do you really know? And you have to kind of like weigh that they're probably used to a different standard of care as well, because they've had pets for so long. And it's like, they probably didn't have CT scans.
Yes.
It's stuff like, so
and
it's
more.
So, you have to say, like, I completely understand what you're talking about with your fixed income, and and I have to bridge it that way. What can we do today? Like, what's our ability? What's our budget? What can we?
I think it's probably more how you say things sometimes than what you say. So the big thing I see is in coaching, honestly, on body language, presenting yourself, and just really being confident in what we're sharing probably goes a lot further than even going really in depth. But you lose people. Yes. I mean, I will see, and I have to tell people what I want you to say is, we did a parvo test is positive. Do you know what parvo is? Do you need me to explain to you what parvo is? Because I have seen them go through the whole spiel the
And
whole
they're
parvo spiel.
I had 8 parvo puppies yesterday. Thank you. And you're like, oh, sorry, my bad.
Yeah. I mean, or the opposite. They'll say at the very end, do you have any questions, or what questions do you have? What's parvo? And you just gave like the whole spiel, and you never really explained what that actually means.
Yeah.
So the reading level actually makes a lot of sense. And we see the same thing over and over. And so for us, sometimes we forget that these are not common things that people experience. And
and I think that a lot of the ire that veterinary professionals have is that they forget the level of education everyone in the clinic has. So vet techs, vet assistants know more than the average pet owner. And the average pet owner has probably never experienced an emergency. The average pet owner, how many people don't appropriately, quote unquote, vaccinate and never deal with parvo, never deal with distemper. And so it's unfair of us to assume that they should know what we know at our level of education. We're here to be educators at all levels in the clinic. So,
and that brings me back a little bit to your social media, because number one, I would say you're braver than me, because you put a lot of things out there, and you kind of deal with some controversial things, talking more about food and nutrition. And man, if you want to stir the pot on social media, mention,
and vaccines.
Raw diet. Yes. And vaccines. And I hit on that a little bit, because if I have to euthanize a, parvo puppy again, it's like heartbreaking. But why did you decide to kind of start putting yourself out there? And do you have a thick skin? Are you able to you don't?
I'm very sensitive.
Really? Okay. So tell me why you do it and why you continue to do it then.
So, kind of like a little bit of background on me is when I was in veterinary school, I was also a bodybuilder and a powerlifter. I also have a sociology minor. And while I was like doing all my bodybuilding powerlifter to like not hyper focus on school, I fell into the medical nutrition realm through like the human side, where people would talk about, this study says intermittent fasting is the best option. And then you look into it and it's rats. And so I started going through these studies, reading them and being like, it doesn't say what these people say it does. Not that I'm like an MD and can make that can read into it like an MD can, but I have enough science literacy, sociology background to know it's not that simple and it's not that straightforward. And so I started on Tumblr, that ages me, but posting like layman's versions of articles. And it did really well. And so I kind of already had that as like how I go about things, is that like, here's a study that I found. Here's why I think we can use it. And here's why I think we shouldn't use it. And then that's your vet school experience, right? You're in journal club, you're in internal medicine rounds.
Evidence-based medicine.
And so I had already kind of approached the like social media that way and had that background. And so it felt very natural to continue it onto like a veterinary social media. But during COVID, there were a lot of cases that I felt could have been managed at home. Not in like a, why are you here? But in like a, if this information were more widespread, then we may not be in this situation.
Like they just don't know.
They just don't know. People don't know what they don't know, right? That's I always say that. People don't know what they don't know. And so I was like, how can I bridge this gap? And at the time, TikTok was really popping off. It was like early 2020. So my first video on TikTok, you can scroll back, is me locking myself in a car. I painted my face like a dog.
Oh, I saw. Yes.
And I showed the temperature rising. And I live in Phoenix. Doesn't take long.
Just like sweating.
Profusely.
Yes.
And I had to refilm it because my dad called me in the middle of it.
Dad, I'm making a video on TikTok. I know.
John Deere was all up in my, I was very mad. I was like, Dad, I'm making a TikTok. And he's like, what's TikTok? So I started like doing like more like funny educational.
Yeah.
And then from there, it just kind of evolved, where I've always had a passion for nutrition because I did bodybuilding and everything. And then just like the misinformation, a lot of my clients feel very shamed by their food choices.
Yes.
And they don't have the luxury of like affording different types of pet food. And so I cannot tell you how many times I would talk to someone and be like, okay, well, what type of food are you feeding? And they'd be like,
yeah,
what was that?
Yeah.
And it's like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I was like, how can I bridge this gap where I have this knowledge? You don't need to be in my ER necessarily. Where are the people going? Millennials are on the internet. I'm a millennial. Let's meet them there. And so it all came together. It's a super long story. Came together to just be like, let's do TikTok. And
it's great.
Yeah. And my husband's a photographer, so
it's great.
I had access to some good stuff.
I do agree with you though. I mean, a lot of times I think vet med, I hear they're frustrated because, people are coming in and saying, oh, I can't feed, foods with grain in it. And they're mad that pet owners are finding this information out there and are listening to it. But my argument is we're not putting the information out to counteract it.
Yeah.
So I can't really blame the pet owners if all they have access to is the misinformation that's out there. So we have to be doing what we can to combat that. And so you do a really good job. If anyone wants to follow her, DVM, on TikTok, on Instagram. Okay, let's get back to some questions. Are you doing okay? You got any questions?
We've only asked a question.
I know. I'm sorry.
All the rest of them have been questions about Tanisha.
I'm rambling, so I can talk forever.
Okay. At Gaddy TU wanted to know, do you think it's possible to have a balanced life while doing emergency?
Absolutely. So the other day I was talking about how I think ER veterinarians have the most cush lifestyle of all vets. Controversial opinion. But those of us in it are like, well, I work 10 days a month full time.
Yeah.
And
how long are your shifts?
12.
Yeah.
I work 10 12s. The other
and then you're
20,
off the rest of the time.
Yeah. And like I like teaching, I like being on call. So there's no on-call mandatory at my clinic. But I give all the mentees, because we don't do interns anymore, we do mentees. They all have my phone number. Do you have a surgery? I'll do it. I love surgery. Like hook it up. So I still have that balance though. And it can be hard with social media because like I'm chronically online. But you will find that my TikTok For You page has no animal veterinary stuff on it. So like I have that separate space even within social media, right, where I'm not constantly exposed to things that trigger and upset me. But I also have a lot of hobbies outside of vet med.
Yeah, let's talk about the
hobbies.
hobbies.
The most important thing is to have hobbies that have nothing to do with veterinary medicine.
I agree. I'm probably not as good at that as you. And I would say that social media is a creative like outlet for me, which is why I really enjoy it. I enjoy creating.
It's a different side of your brain.
Yes. But you have taken that even a step further. And I kind of discovered that you are also an author. Like you are a published author. And I am a voracious reader. And so I love your books.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you became a published author along with an emergency veterinarian and all the things?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, my English teacher said that if you do National Novel Writing Month, which is the month of November, you have 31 or 30 days, I can never remember, to write a 50,000 word novel. He said, I will give you an A in the class
that
automatically.
That would take me 14 years.
It's 1,662 words a day.
That seems like a lot.
Yeah. It's not though.
Maybe,
it's like
maybe 18 years.
A page and a half.
No, I'm doing the math.
Shane's not really a reader. No. Or a writer.
So, and I, other ER vets will know that most of us are not type A, we're type B plus. That's how I've always described myself. I'm not type A, I'm type B plus. But if there's a challenge,
right,
I want to do it. Like all these challenges that people have at like these conferences, I'm like scanning the QR. I want to win. Like I'm going to win. So I was like, cool, I'll do it. And so I wrote my first novel when I was in like my junior year of high school. And then
that's insane.
The next year it rolled around and I was like, well, I got to do it again. And so every year, I think I've only missed it 2 years since 2005. I've done National Novel Writing Month. And then probably about 2.5 years ago, I got really serious into it where I was like, maybe I should do something with all of these because these were just Word files sitting on my computer. And I got really back into reading. I think I read like 80 books in 2020 because I was just like plowing through them. And I was like, you know what? I could do this. Mine aren't that bad.
No, they're great.
Thanks. So I just went through and I joined like a few Facebook groups that teach you how to self-publish, and just, I already was on social media. So making like an author TikTok, I was like, oh, I got this. Yeah. This is easy, so, and just went with it.
I mean, it is a very unique creative skill set to be able to write. But then also I think to have the dedication to sit and say like, I'm going to do it and I'm going to put out this many words, that falls to me a little bit into like a veterinary's realm of I'm going to do this, I'm going to plan it out. And so I can see where you could do both, but they're great. Do you want to share what genres you write or?
Yeah. So I have 3 pen names. One is CM Deer. That's my like young adult, new adult, like urban fantasy. And then I've almost finished a trilogy that's like more high fantasy that should be coming out like maybe next year. And then I have 2 pen names, which you're free to reach out and ask me because I don't share it. They are spicy.
Yes.
Yeah. Spicy.
She's got a little spicy line.
Paranormal romance. And so those are the 2 others. And so I don't lead with it because like I have to look people in the eye when I meet them. and knowing that they've read
the book.
They've read something I've written. I'm like,
that's funny.
How do you feel about it? But
I feel that way when I sometimes make like a really goofy video online and then I go to like my kid's school and one of the PTA moms is like, oh my gosh, I found your TikTok account. I'm like, you did.
I hope it's not the one of me dancing.
Yeah. I hope it's not that one I just posted.
Yeah.
So you kind of share a part of yourself and it's weird sometimes to meet people in real life that have, experienced that.
It feels very raw.
Yes. But I appreciate you bringing me your latest book and signing it. And I even read half of it last night and it was great. So
I'm glad.
So when you say you don't have thick skin, do you read the comments online that people respond to, or you just put your stuff out there and just not look?
For veterinary or for my books?
Both.
So books, reviews are for readers. They're not for authors. So I avoid it like the plague. If there's a sensitivity issue, I'll say for reach out to me for sure. I put it in all my books. Like if there's a sensitivity, I have sensitivity readers, but if there's something that I messed up, send it to me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, reviews are for readers. From the veterinary space, I do read my comments because I like to engage with people. Like to me, social media is a community. It's not like here's my face, take it or leave it. It's a community. And I have people on Instagram that I feel like I'm friends with and I've never met them.
Yes.
And so I do engage. I was a lot less likely to block people probably about 6 months ago because it seemed unfair to me.
I block.
Yeah, I
block and delete like crazy.
I do too now.
It's not worth it to
because
engage
back
with
then
certain people.
I was like, and I've always said that like trolls are pigeons, and if you feed them, they'll keep coming back for more. So the more that but there's also a part of me that like deeply does not want to be misunderstood. And so when people are making these mean comments, to me, I'm like, no, you're just misunderstanding me. I feel like education is the great unifier. And if we all have the same information, then we should come to a pretty similar conclusion because facts are facts. And like having that sociology background, I understand that there are things that shape your perception of that.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you've got this overwhelming evidence that this happens and people are still telling you, and so at first it was like, no, you just let me meet you in the middle. Let's try and talk through this. And then I realized that like the people who are leaving these comments aren't there to learn. They're there because there's something very unhappy in their life. And the way that they get validation is by riling up strangers on the internet. I've known them in real life, and it's so shocking how in real life they are a normal human being, and then you see them on the internet and you're like, what is wrong with you? And so now I screenshot because I have a folder. Yeah, I have a folder because,
as Dion says, you keep receipts.
I keep receipts. I do. And it's funny. Last year when I was here, one of the girls that I met, she was like, "You're the receipts doctor." I was like,
"Oh, you'll post like some of the comments sometimes," and I'm like, "Ooh,
foul human beings."
Foul.
But yeah, so I'm a lot more likely to block now because I realize that like. What does Dita Von T say? You could be the freshest peach in the world and someone doesn't like peaches. So my content's not for everyone. I would love for it to be, but to protect my own mental health and to continue to show up on social media, you got to draw the line somewhere. Yeah. And it's like, I've got like a 1.5 strike rule where it's like, if you say something and I say, hey, I think we're on a different page. Why don't you watch my highlights? And they'll be like, they'll say something rude back. You're done. You're done. So
there's a couple people that say things, but the back and forth like helps the engagement of the posts, and they're not like straight up hateful, and I'll leave those. Yeah. But the ones that are just posting that like
your vets just sit around and do nothing.
Like, you just want my dog to die so you can like pay for your house. I'm like, okay, I'm not even it's just not even worth it.
Not worth it.
I just block and
you're not my audience.
Yes. Yeah. You're not the goal. So well, I appreciate what you do because I think the more of us doing it, it definitely helps. Okay. Another question that we had, which I thought was interesting, was at 3B Davis 24 wanted to know, I love my clinic, but they won't let me progress in my career. Ooh. Do you have any advice? And you were talking about like having mentees. So is there a big training, learning culture at your hospital, or how do you think people can progress in their career if their clinic doesn't support it?
Yeah, I feel like the word mentorship is an abused term because there are a lot of people who graduate vet school and they say, I don't want to do this internship because I'm going to make no money. I don't want to specialize. I just feel like I need a little bit extra and I need it to be hands-on. So I don't need to shadow people. I need like to be the one doing the surgery while someone just stands there and watches to make sure. And so they're like, I want a mentor. And then these people who are in practice are like, yeah, I'll like be in the same room as you for 3 months while you're doing, clinics, and then I'll cut you loose. It's like, those are two different ideas of mentorship.
Very different.
And so you have to, you've got these people who, and then some people just don't like to teach, but they want to have veterinarians who do things the same way as them.
Yes. Or they're just trying to hire.
Yes.
So they want to say, yes, I will mentor you.
Yeah,
and they're
I'll mentor
amazing
you.
veterinarians, but they're horrible teachers and they don't want to be doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can be a brilliant veterinarian, but I feel like sometimes people are too smart and they don't know how to get back. They don't remember what it was like to be a new grad.
Yes.
And so they just like forget. In our clinic, we've got a mentorship program. And this last year was the first year. So there were a little bit of guinea pigs. And I'm sure they would tell you, they would tell you, they're like, I get paid way more than an intern. Sometimes I'm doing intern things like working overnights. But the idea being that like you have someone with you at all times that can answer questions if you have them, but is not going to micromanage you. Because I think it's really important to take those training wheels off, because you are not going to be able to, I don't want you to be like, okay, go do a splenectomy.
Right.
But like, you've got a vomiting and diarrhea case, come to me with questions. But I'm not going to sit there and be like, what diagnostics are you going to run? Because at some point you just have to
start doing it.
Yeah. And once you start doing it, you start getting that confidence that, the safety net is there. But the safety net is a lot lower than it was like a month ago. And to me, that's what like excellent mentorship is. When I mentor for surgeries, I'm not a surgeon, but if I get called in to help a mentee do a surgery, I'm just holding things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They're
like
doing
I'm
everything.
there.
Yeah. But they're going to do it. I'm not going to let you do it wrong. I'm not going to let you kill an animal, but I'm not going to do it. You need that hands-on.
Yeah.
So that, to me, that's what mentorship is.
Do you think for somebody who has that desire to learn, but maybe doesn't have the mentorship at their practice or is not supported to go do additional CE or hands-on, is there a way for them to bring that to leadership and say this needs to change, or do they need to be looking elsewhere for that?
I think it depends, because like plants can't grow without sun, and if they're not going to give you sun, what are you going to do? You can't really do anything. And at some point, you exhaust all your options and say, here are gaps in my knowledge, or here are gaps in this clinic, and here's how I'd like to fill them. Because in my opinion, you should not bring up a problem unless you have a solution.
100%. Yeah.
Like I always am like, this is my issue. Here are my thoughts on it. What can we do? And if you're sitting there and thinking like, what can I do? And it's blank. There's nothing that you can think of. Maybe it's time to move on.
Or you've already tried A, B, and C,
Mhm.
and there's been no response from leadership.
Now you're at F, and you're like, it's time to bail.
And honestly, we know that we contribute to burnout in this profession by not continuing to learn, by not continuing to elevate people in their positions. So you're going to lose people in your practice if you don't
100%
want to teach and train. So I am sad for this person, but I would say there's a lot of opportunity out there to be at a place that does support it. And so I don't want anyone to become like, disenchanted completely because of their one situation.
It's hard. There's no database,
Yes.
You just got to like cross your fingers. I usually get interns drunk. That's what I did. I externed at all the places I was going to do.
Like not on shift. Let's just make it clear.
Like maybe after. But when I did my internship, I did externs at all the places that I was going to put in the match. And on like the last day, I would like the intern I worked most closely with. I was like, I really appreciate you taking like the time. Let me buy you a drink.
You're like, hey.
And then like 4 drinks in, I was like, so what's the tea?
This is how Questions with Crocker, we do all our research this way as well. So.
Yeah.
We get drunk and then we plan.
Uh-huh.
Okay, we'll do one last question and then we probably need to wrap it up. At TLW19746 wanted to know, what does doggy respiratory distress look like? And I would like you to explain that. And then also, is it an emergency?
Yes. If respiratory distress is like one of the few actual emergencies that we see. I think respiratory distress is one of the hardest ones because you feel so helpless. There's only so much you can do.
Yes.
And you can break it down like you were saying at your lecture the other day. You can say, is this heart? Is this lung? Or is this other? And so you have to, my text joke that I have this flowchart brain where it's like, okay, you can't breathe. Is it because of your lungs? And is it because of your lungs because there's fluid? Or is it infection? Did you Terracorday. Like, we go kind of through it. And so it's like, you got to kind of have a step-by-step. One is
while the dog is trying to die on you.
Yeah. Don't kill the patient while trying to figure it out. So it's like, okay, what is something safe that we can do to chill this dog out? Let's start with butorphanol. Should we set an IV catheter? Ideally. But if it means that that catheter is going to be used to push the last of the euthanasia solution because it's not going to make it. No. I'm a big fan of dumping. That's like my techs know that if something's in respiratory distress and it's looking like it's getting near the end and we're not really sure what it is, they just dump it.
Yeah.
And see. And it's
if
like
there's fluid coming out. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've revived
dumping
CHF
is
dogs.
like when you pick the dog up by the hind end and you like
just shake it,
like head down and you're shaking it. If fluid is just like flowing out of it, like it's not a great sign. It's probably not good.
But I've saved
well for the dog.
I've had CHF dogs that I'm like, you are not long for this world. Dump it, and they're sitting up like, oh, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for getting the fluid out of my chest.
Yeah, for temporarily. But yeah, I would say, start with how can we semi-stabilize, because there are very few, other than like choking, there are very few respiratory emergencies.
Choking is not that common. Like a lot of people come in, my dog is choking. It's actually not
reverse sneezing.
Usually, yes.
Collapsing
There's
trachea.
A lot of other reasons that your dog is making a sound that is similar to choking. Okay, so for a pet owner, do you tell them like if the respiratory rate is like 50 to 60 breaths per minute, like what, or are you just like if your dog
If you're worried, I'm worried, come in.
Okay.
End of story. Like when people call and they say, he's breathing funny, okay, come in. Where are you? How long are you? Where are you? What's the closest clinic to you? Let's get you to the closest clinic, Or my dog has a history of CHF and he's acting quite, come in. Yeah. Don't hesitate. I will never fault my staff for calling a stat when it's not really a stat, like owner stats or whatever.
Right.
If the owner comes in and says, he's breathing funny, I don't bring it to the back. Let's do this. And even if it ends up just being reverse sneezing, we can be like, how
this
silly.
Is great. Yeah.
Go back in your room, hang out with your family. But it's much better than the like, it's breathing funny. Okay, let's put you in a room. Let's check you in.
And then all of a sudden you go in and it's like purple.
Blue, and you're like, they're like, oh, by the way, it fell in the pool. And you're like, oh no. Yeah. But I feel like respiratory distress is when I feel the most helpless. Because there's really so much you can do. Yeah.
And does that happen a lot? I mean,
yeah, I think so.
Depends.
In my opinion, pets compensate. And so a lot of times like there'll be something going on and maybe the owner's like, oh, they haven't been quite as active or they haven't been like eating as much.
But they're getting older.
Yes.
It's getting hot.
But then all of a sudden they come in and it's like there's a like chest full of fluid and the owner just didn't know it was like gradually getting worse. And then all of a sudden and obviously there's some breeds like brachycephalics that also do really silly things and just aspirate and then they are on the ground and trying to die. But most of the time they just hide it until it's so bad. And by the time it gets to you, it's so bad.
Because they're predators, but also kind of prey animals. It doesn't behoove them to show weakness.
To act sick.
Yeah. And then, you live in a hot climate. It gets hot out. They're just slowing down.
Yeah. They're panting.
They're like, they're breathing out. Oh, I just figured it's hot out.
Yeah, I mean, I do that every day.
Yeah.
See me on hole 17.
Yeah.
Like, give that guy some. He needs to be dumped.
He's in respiratory stress.
He needs to be dumped. Yeah. No, and it's like they don't know what they know.
Yeah.
Or people, so it's just come in.
But I agree. It's good to ask. And so I always just encourage pet owners to like call, ask, or follow emergency vets on social media because we share a lot about what is a true emergency, what to look for, cases, things like that can help them recognize things faster and then help their pet a little bit better. So this has been great. I wish we could talk, and honestly, we will.
Yeah, we're actually getting kicked out of the hotel.
I know. The conference is ending, and we are ending it with you, and I'm happy to end it on a bang. So
rounding it out.
Yes. If people do want to reach out to you, if they want to know more, what is the best way to be in contact with you?
Instagram, because I am notoriously awful at emails. So on Instagram, I'm er.dvm. And then on TikTok, I'm just erdvm. Instagram, much bigger, like character allowance.
Yes.
And I do read all my DMs. Sometimes they go to like the forbidden folder and I don't realize it for like 2 weeks and I'm very, very sorry. But for the most part, I read and answer all of my DMs.
Everything. Yeah. I appreciate that you do that because that is not easy sometimes to keep up with. And then be nice or else you get blocked. And no.
Yeah. I haven't had anyone come into my DMs and be rude.
Right.
Or mean. People have been short and being like, how can you be a veterinarian and eat meat? And kind of like attack me a little bit about it. But for the most part, I feel like if you're confident enough to be face to face with someone, which DM's close enough, whatever, people tend to be very kind.
It's a new face to face.
Yeah.
Do you know when we started this, Shane didn't know what a DM was, so he's gotten an education that he never.
You didn't slide into his DM?
No.
Yeah.
No. We didn't even have DMs.
DMs were way.
That's how I slid into my husband's DMs.
Oh, you did.
I did. Mm-hmm.
Nice. That's another story for another day. I like that.
It's a fun one.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. You can leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. You can watch us on YouTube. It has been a long conference, but we are still here. And I am thankful for everyone who listens to these episodes, submits questions. We can't have it without you. So continue to follow us at Questions with Crocker and have a wonderful day.